On a quiet afternoon in the fall of 1968, a U.S. Navy swift boat, PCF-3, was docked in the Vietnamese coastal city of Ha Tien, not far from the Cambodian border. Lieutenant Mike Bernique and his crew were enjoying a well-deserved break from the tedium of a long offshore patrol. As the men relaxed, a group of friendly Vietnamese approached, reporting that a team of Viet Cong tax collectors was extorting money and supplies a few miles away on the banks of a local canal. Because of its proximity to the politically sensitive Cambodian border, the canal had long been declared off-limits to American forces. Making a snap decision, Bernique gave orders to cast off. With its crew at battle stations, PCF-3 headed up the forbidden stream. A short time later, the swift boat rounded a bend, surprising the tax collectors as they went about their business. Stunned to see an American man-of-war on the prohibited waterway, the VC stood open-mouthed as Bernique swung into the attack. With 3 Viet Cong down and the others falling back in disarray, several men were put ashore to scoop up an assortment of weapons, ammunition, and documents. But the fight wasn't over yet. The enemy regrouped, returning in strength, in an attempt to drive the swift boat off their turf. For a brief, furious moment, the battle was rejoined as Bernique and his crew stood their ground. When the smoke cleared, 2 more Viet Cong were dead, and Mike Bernique was the undisputed master of the Vinh Te Canal. Returning to Ha Tien, the swift skipper found himself sailing straight into the center of a different kind of battle. Minutes after tying up, Bernique was ordered to headquarters in Saigon to face a possible court-martial. Called into the Admiral's office, the lieutenant was halfway through his report when a senior captain interrupted him, declaring that not even 100 dead Viet Cong were worth the life of a single American sailor. Turning on the officer, Bernique growled, "I won't accept any dead Americans, but 100 to 1, I'll take those odds any time."
The theory on the part of the staff was that he should be awarded a court-martial, but after I listened to his report and evaluated what he had contributed, both by his own kills and by virtue of having taught us that that canal was usable, I decided instead that we should award him a medal, and we redubbed the Vinh Te Canal Bernique Creek.
By the summer of 1964, the United States was well involved in an effort to support the beleaguered nation of South Vietnam in its struggle against a guerrilla insurgency from within and outright aggression from its communist neighbor to the north. Above the 17th parallel, the fledgling South Vietnamese Navy fought back, conducting pinprick naval raids along the communist coast with American-supplied Nasty-class patrol boats. It was shortly after one such raid that the American destroyer Maddox entered the Gulf of Tonkin on a routine intelligence-gathering mission. For 2 days, the Maddox continued its patrol. But on the afternoon of August 2nd, 1964, the North Vietnamese Navy came out to fight. Following a series of controversial naval engagements, the die was cast, and the United States of America was at war in Vietnam. fully committed to combat in country. The American command soon realized they were up against a much better equipped foe than the ragtag guerrillas first thought to be operating in the South. The destruction of an arms-laden North Vietnamese supply ship in early 1965 illustrated the scope of the communist resupply effort.
I flew up there, and the amount of supplies on that trawler was greatly exceeded our expectations of what the enemy could do. I mean, it was just chock-a-block with ammunition and K-47s and anti-tank, hand-carried anti-tank weapons, PRT-7s. And it became evident at that time that a major share of their supplies, and we estimated 70%, were coming by sea.
Intelligence indicated that the enemy was mounting a two-pronged seaborne infiltration campaign. Large steel-hulled supply trawlers were coming down well clear of the coast, then making a perpendicular dash into the beach. Less obvious than the trawlers, seagoing junks loaded with arms were paralleling the coast, mingling with legitimate native traffic until able to deliver their cargo. To stem the flow, a joint U.S. South Vietnamese interdiction campaign was organized. Coastal surveillance centers set up and 4 maritime patrol zones established. Stretching over 1,700 miles from the DMZ in the north to the Cambodian border in far southwest, the area of operations extended out over 40 miles from shore. Tasked with stopping enemy seaborne infiltrators hidden in a swarm of civilian merchant and marketing vessels, the effort was christened, naturally enough, Operation Market Time. By the first week of April 1965, 28 ships were assigned. Destroyers, minesweepers, and aircraft from the 7th Fleet, aided by land-based patrol bombers and the South Vietnamese junk force, took on the first patrols. But the big warships drew too much water to get in close, where most of the enemy traffic was. With no effective shallow draft patrol boats on hand, the Navy turned to the U.S. Coast Guard for help. Always prepared, the Coast Guard responded with the dispatch of 17 Point-class WPB patrol craft. Originally designed for search and rescue duties along the U.S. coast, the 82-foot WPBs were steel-hulled, displacing about 65 tons and drawing a mere 5.5 feet when fully loaded. Well armed, with a top speed of 18 knots and a reputation for seaworthiness, the WPBs were a perfect interim solution for equipping the early inshore patrols. Within a few weeks, the first WPBs were in country and on patrol. Out to sea, the deep draft ships and aircraft were setting into a routine of surveillance and interdiction.
Clean cut. This is Bluebird 30.
Large cargo junk, position X-ray, Romeo 7386.
Request surface units investigate.
Almost overnight, Operation Market Time had blossomed into a huge undertaking. On 30 July, the Coastal Surveillance Force was officially established as U.S. Navy Task Force 115.
John Paul Jones said, "Give me a fast ship, I intend to sail in harm's way." And these things took us into harm's way, but the lovely little things usually manage to get us back out again.
Without time for the usual research and development, Navy officials searched the inventory of available civilian craft for its own inshore patrol boat. The perfect solution was found with the discovery of a 50-foot all-welded aluminum boat then being used to transport offshore drilling crews in the Gulf of Mexico. The boat's manufacturer was more than happy to modify the design to naval specifications, and the patrol craft Fast, soon to be known as the Swift boat, went into production. Displacing 19 tons and drawing only 3.5 feet of water, the Swifts were easily capable of a 28-knot top speed. And the little Swifts were well armed. A twin 50 caliber machine gun mount was located in a tub above the pilot house. A piggyback 81mm mortar 50 caliber machine gun was mounted on the fantail. Light machine guns, grenade launchers, and other handheld weapons rounded out the arms load. Crewed by a complement of 1 officer and 5 enlisted men, these snub-nosed little warships were exactly what the Navy needed for the shallow water end of Operation Market Time. They would soon become one of the most recognizable symbols of the American Navy in Vietnam. As the interdiction effort expanded, so did the need for swift boats. Originally, the Navy planned to acquire 54 of the new craft, but the order was soon increased to 84. The number of Coast Guard WPBs was increased also, from 17 to 26, and by the end of 1966, Task Force 115 had become a formidable naval presence. Soon after Operation Market Time was established, most of the destroyers on deep water patrol were replaced by specially equipped radar picket destroyer escorts. Boasting sophisticated radar and communications gear, high endurance, and good seakeeping abilities, these small ships proved perfect for the Market Time mission. But even as the number of U.S. vessels increased, so did the North Vietnamese infiltration effort. A bolstering of Market Time's air umbrella was called for, and P-5 Marlin flying boats were called in to join the effort. The new P-3 Orion anti-submarine bomber was also drafted into service. Operating out of bases in Vietnam and the Philippines, the big 4-engine Orions were ideally suited for covering the enormous areas encompassed by the Market Time patrol. In the fall of 1966, Market Time's most unusual participant made its debut. The Patrol Air Cushion Vehicle, or PAC-V, could operate on both sea and land. But despite its amazing 70-knot top speed and its ability to chase seaborne infiltrators ashore, the 3 Market Time PAC-Vs proved unsuitable for interdiction operations and were soon reassigned. Hydrofoil patrol gunboats were another exotic addition to the Market Time fleet. But operations in the rough seas off Vietnam soon revealed that, like the PAC-Vs, the sophisticated hydrofoils were ill-suited to the anti-infiltration role. By 1967, American supply ships were streaming into South Vietnamese ports in unprecedented numbers. Viet Cong swimmers had successfully attacked shipping in port before, and Task Force 115 was ordered to provide a defense against any future attempts. Harbor entrance control posts were established, and patrol boats swept the busy ports on a round-the-clock basis.
Listener 3-3, this is High Post, over.
High Post, this is Listener 3-3, over.
High Post.
Eagle Watch, recon, reports, large
Fishing junk entering your area.
Eagle Watch suspects he is changing course to avoid your patrol.
Can you investigate? Over.
High Post, this is Listener 3-3, roger. Have contact visually, we'll intercept, out.
Below the waves, teams of Navy divers checked anchorages and hulls for VC mines. It was off the coast and in the shallows where the real work of Operation Market Time took place. One task remained constant: the never-ending search for communist supplies and personnel. Day after day, swift boat and WPB crews scoured their patrol areas, fighting when they had to, rendering aid when they could. During the dry season, they roasted under the Southeast Asian sun, battling pounding seas and torrential rains during the monsoon. Along the DMZ, a small swift boat base was established at the mouth of the Qua Viet River to better patrol the coast along the border between South and North Vietnam. Well within range of North Vietnamese artillery, the sailors of Coastal Division 14 faced danger not only from enemy fire, but from the sea itself.
We had 4 boats up there, and 1 week we lost 2 of them. Not to enemy fire, but to the surf. And I was the first one to encounter a bad day of surf, and I was driving the boat in, and the surf was running maybe 15, 18 feet. And I was an assault boat coxswain instructor before I came to Nam, so I know how to drive a boat in the surf. Wave just picked us up, came in from another direction. We were screaming down it, nose first like this, starting to broach to the left like that. I just throttles full, one port full ahead, starboard full of stern, wheel full right. The whole boat was just shuddering and screaming. Those beautiful engines, man, they were hanging in there going like mad. My gunner said we were leaning so far he could have reached out and touched the water. Every time a wave caught up to us, I just back into it. I told my skipper we're going to lose boats. He didn't believe me, but we did. Happily, we didn't lose any guys.
The number of vessels searched rose from hundreds into the thousands, then into the tens of thousands. Reactions on the part of the Vietnamese whose boats were stopped ranged from cooperative and friendly to hostile and sullen. Every boarding held the potential for a firefight. Alertness meant survival. At times the task seemed overwhelming, but as tedious as the patrols may have seemed, the American command was pleased.
Market arm operation was so well organized with 100 swift boats, with appropriate tenders and so forth, and helicopters were integrated into that, I wouldn't say it was airtight, but the probability of a trawler getting through was rather small.
Still, communist trawlers continued to attempt occasional runs past the blockade. From early 1967 on, the large steel-hulled infiltrators found themselves blocked by yet another obstacle. Newly deployed high-endurance cutters, armed with hard-hitting 5-inch guns. Another enemy gun runner ran afoul of TF-115 on June 12, 1967, when patrol planes spotted a suspicious trawler 40 miles off the coast heading south. Designated Skunk Alpha on the plotting board, for 3.5 days the trawler continued its journey. On the dark night of July 15th, the smuggler made its move. Dashing in from the sea, Skunk Alpha was able to mask its radar image against the South Vietnamese coastline long enough to throw its deep water pursuers off the scent. Inshore, Navy swift boat PCF-79 and the Coast Guard cutter Point Orient waited. PCF-79 found the smuggler first, but the heavily armed Skunk Alpha wasn't giving up without a fight. Helicopters and a Navy gunboat joined in. Finally, a well-placed mortar round from PCF-79 brought the gun runner to bay. Next morning, a beached and burned-out smuggler gave up its secrets. Over 12 tons of ammunition and 3,000 communist weapons never made it into the hands of the Viet Cong, thanks to Operation Market Time and the swift boat sailors of PCF-79. Six months later, during the Communist Tet Offensive of 1968, 4 more trawlers tried their luck at running the Market Time blockade. 3 were destroyed. 1 ran for home. By the fall of 1968, Task Force 115 had basically accomplished its mission. Thanks to the efficiency of market-time coastal patrols, Viet Cong junks were rarely able to smuggle their men and supplies in from the sea. The trawlers had virtually ceased their runs. Along the major waterways of the Mekong Delta, the river patrol boats of Task Force 116 and the Joint Army-Navy Mobile Riverine Force had fought the communists to a near stalemate. But where once the enemy had received most of his supplies by sea, now the overland Ho Chi Minh Trail served as his main avenue for supply. Taking advantage of America's unwillingness to violate the neutrality of South Vietnam's neighbors, the trail snaked its way south from Hanoi in relative safety, terminating along the Cambodian border in the spiderweb of creeks and canals that make up the southern Mekong Delta. Now the swift boats and WPBs were to be sent into this maze of muddy waterways. It was here they would see their finest hours.
The strategy in the South shifted dramatically into one of actually running combined boat operations instead of single boat operations, as we were doing on market time, operating in a more integrated fashion with the Army and with the Vietnamese, making operations where we were setting up ambushes, combinations between boats and helicopters, a lot of new strategies which were an attempt to take the war to the enemy. And in fact, we were, I think, pretty successful.
Following Mike Bernique's unauthorized swift boat raid on the Vinh Te Canal, American naval commanders decided that bold action could seal off the flow of communist supplies into the Delta, if not at their source, then at least at the points where they were floated across the border. The new operation was dubbed Sealords, for Southeast Asia Lake Ocean River Delta Strategy. Ordered into one of the longest-held communist strongholds in South Vietnam, the Sealords raiders would soon hunt the Delta's VC into virtual extinction. Combining the Swifts and WPBs of market time with the speedy river patrol boats, heavily armored monitors and troop transports of Task Force 116 and the Mobile Riverine Force, a near impenetrable string of barriers along the Cambodian border was soon established. Swifts and WPBs attacked from the south, upstream from the Gulf of Thailand. PBRs and monitors closed in from the north, down the smaller creeks and canals. Sailing into the enemy's own backyard, the Sealords raiders were indeed going in harm's way.
You'd just be going along, and the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese Army forces would put a machine gun in somebody's home, in one of the huts there, and they'd open up on you. Other times you'd end up taking on a company-sized strength or larger, because they'd be sitting there waiting for you. A lot of times they called the shots. They picked the time when to fight.
The Communist Command had long considered the Southern Delta their own private reserve. They would not give it up without a fight. The enemy had years to lay out his defense and was well prepared. Viet Cong sappers planted mines at likely landing places. Bridges throughout the region were targeted and destroyed. Bunkers and machine gun nests located just above the high water line waited for the swift boat's approach. Ambushes along the rivers were frequent. Contact was heavy. And costly. But despite the cost in men and boats, within months, the Sealords operation began paying off. With the barrier patrols in place, massive multi-boat raids were mounted into the heart of the enemy's strongholds. Supported by Navy Seawolf gunships and Black Pony attack planes, swift boats and brave sailors sought out the Viet Cong where he lived, clearing the riverbanks of anything that offered him aid and comfort. Navy SEALs went ashore to gather intelligence and sow fear into the VC hearts. As the pressure continued, the flow of supplies reaching the enemy slowed. From a flood to a trickle, and finally began drying up. With communist domination finally lifted, civilians began returning to the southern delta, areas that had been for years devoid of commerce, thanks to the extortion of Viet Cong tax collectors, once again became centers of agriculture and regional industry. By late 1969, the Mekong Delta had been nearly cleared of Viet Cong, and Sealords had become an unqualified success.
It worked extremely well. The Viet Cong intelligence that we intercepted was that it was really hampering their operation, and General Abrams felt that it really accelerated the pacification of the Delta because the Viet Cong were just not able to move around.
But political winds blowing from the United States foretold an end to the American combat role in Vietnam. By the end of 1970, most of the swift boats, WPBs, and other Sealords craft were turned over as the South Vietnamese Navy took up the fight. Throughout 1971, the turnover continued. By the spring of 1972, only 2,000 U.S. sailors remained in country. With the signing of the Paris Peace Accords in January 1973, the last American combat troops left South Vietnam. Of the original Market Time and Sealords vessels, 2 radar picket destroyer escorts, 7 high-endurance cutters, 26 WPBs, and a total of 107 swift boats were left behind.
I heard the engines, and there's nothing like the sound of the engines, and I started to get goosebumps. And I stepped at the top of the ladder to the pier, and there were the 2 boats sitting side by side with their engines turning over. And I swear to you, I was suddenly like 22 years old, back in Vietnam, and there were the swift boats.
While the Coast Guard retained numbers of WPBs for stateside search and rescue, the Navy left nearly all of its swift boats in Vietnam. But thanks to a twist of fate, PCF-1 and PCF-2 The first Swifts, delivered to the Navy in 1965, still flew the Stars and Stripes. For over 20 years, the old boats have been assigned to a naval training unit in the Panama Canal Zone. Seemingly forgotten, PCF-1 and 2 trained foreign naval crews and conducted occasional patrols, waiting patiently in the tropical sun for eventual disposal. But before PCF-1 and 2 could keep their date with the scrappers, fate stepped in once again. During a 1994 inspection trip to the Canal Zone, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy Wade Sanders discovered the old boat's pier side at the Rodman Naval Station. An ex-Swift boat sailor himself, Sanders immediately recognized the old PCFs as the last of their kind. Soon, the aging Swifts were transported to the Naval Amphibious Base in Little Creek, Virginia, where a complete overhaul and restoration program was put in hand. In June 1995, after 30 years of service, PCF-1 and 2 got underway on their final mission as Navy men of war. Manned by a mixed crew of active duty and Vietnam veteran sailors, the old boats embarked on their last patrol. Outbound for the Navy Museum in Washington, D.C., the boats cruised north up the Chesapeake Bay. For modern-day crewmen and brave sailors from a war long past, it was a journey filled with joyous exuberance. And sober reflection. After an overnight stay at the Navy's Dahlgren Weapons Station, the Swifts made their way up the Potomac River, passing historic sites and national shrines. Until finally the capital hove into sight. With diesels throttled back, slowly, almost reluctantly, PCF-1 and 2 made their approach to the Navy Museum Pier. Lines were passed and secured. Engines were shut down. And the last Swift boat patrol passed into history. Traveling from across the country, hundreds of ex-Swift boat veterans gathered for one last look and a final moment with the little warships that had served them so well. For the next 2 days, PCF-1 and 2 became floating time machines, transporting market-time veterans and ex-Sealords raiders, along with their families, back to a place in time when swift boats carried brave sailors into harm's way. All too soon, the rides were over, and on June 17, 1995, the swift boat saga drew to an end. As PCF-2 prepared for a new career as a civilian research vessel, PCF-1, the Navy's first and last swift boat, was formally turned over to the Navy Museum for preservation and display.
The symbol that will exist with the placement of this swift boat will be to symbolize the courage, the initiative, the imagination, the sheer guts of the remarkable crews that sailed and steamed in that craft. Every time that I look in the museum at that swift boat, those are the thoughts that will run through my mind as I salute you for your tremendous contribution.
No words here today, no 30-year-later memory or description will ever convey the sight and the feeling of 6 or 10 or 12 Swifts, engines throbbing, radios crackling, guns thundering towards the riverbank, moving ever closer into harm's way. But that's not all that it was. We sunbathed and we skinny dipped. We traded sea rations for fresh shrimp, and we left our Vietnamese recipients of Uncle Sam's technology grinning from ear to ear as they believed that they got the better of the deal. When we broke the rules, which we never did, of course, Admiral, we would say, what the hell can they do? Send us to Vietnam? And through it all, we never forgot how to laugh. The times we lobbed raw eggs from boat to boat, the great flare fights that we had, ultimately lighting Bill Rood's life raft on fire, and of course, pet dogs that didn't understand English or Vietnamese for don't do it there. There were as many moments of humor as swift boats and sailors. And we exulted in the beauty of a country that took us from glorious green rice paddy, black water buffalo caressing the banks of rivers, children giggling and playing on dikes, sampans filled with produce going to market, that suddenly took us from innocence and tranquility deep into the madness of firefights, chaos reigning around us, 50 calibers diminishing our hearing, screams for medevac piercing the radio waves, fishtailing rockets passing the pilot house, all suddenly to be replaced by the most serene, eerie beauty the eye could behold and an awesome sense of survival. We lived in the daily contradiction of living and dying. We never looked on each other as officer or enlisted, as Okie or Downeasterner. We were just plain brothers in combat, proud Americans, together with our proud vessels who answered the call. We loved these boats, even if we abused them of necessity. And the truth is, they loved us back. They never let us down.
The undersigned, as an authorized representative of the Naval Historical Center, accepts the below-described ship, together with its onboard equipment, from Ernest E. Christensen, Rear Admiral, United States Navy, Commander Training Command, U.S. Atlantic Fleet, authorized representative of the United States Navy. Signed for by Dr. William Dudley, Naval Historical Center.
For the men of the last patrol, there was only one duty left to perform.
Goodfellow. From young man, about 26 years old. He's actually a little older than I was at the time. Had 3 years of college. He's my second-class engineman on the boat.
The lines.
John P. McDermott, bosun mate second class. Was born in 1945. I think he was 21 years old, 22 years old. That's our man.
Yep.
It's John. We know where he is.
Yes, we do.